Who would have thought such a simple story about a simple dog would become such a big part of how I see the world? Today we're going to revisit a Canadian classic and see how that big story became a little part of mine. Hey everybody, it's Sammy, your favorite Ozark Canadian, and if you like a good story mixed in with some obsolete technology, well, you've come to the right place. Now, to all my American friends out there, this is probably a show you've never even heard of. But if you grew up shoveling snow and drinking maple syrup like I did north of the border, all you gotta do is hear that theme song. There's a voice that keeps on calling me down the road. And you know exactly what show we're talking about. Running from 1979 till 1985, The Littlest Hobo was a Canadian classic. And it's all about this German Shepherd. Now you might think that the Canadians were just ripping off the American Lassie show, but I think he's a lot more than that. See, he'd come in every episode, there'd be something wrong, something's on fire, there's some kind of criminal thing going on. What made this dog different was at the end of every episode, whoever the person was that he'd come into their lives, they'd always try to adopt him. So, hey, London, why don't you come stay with us? You don't seem to have a home. We'd love to keep you around. Well, then the show always ends with this dog heading down the road. See, that dog didn't want to stay. He just would rather be on his own, traveling and helping people. And that's why the song ties so beautifully in with the show. It really just sums up everything that's going on in this show. Another interesting thing about the show is that it was completely filmed on videotape instead of opting for traditional film, which I think is why the aesthetic has always really stuck with me, and is probably a big inspiration for why I've personally gone down the road of filming everything in a video cassette format. Now, I feel no discussion about this show would be complete without mentioning and giving credit to where credit is due. Mr. Terry Bush, the man who wrote and recorded this song, giving us this great Canadian classic. If you haven't heard this song in its full in the original version, search the Littlest Hobo theme song and you'll come right to it. By the time I got into the show, it was the early 90s. I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and nothing appeals to a boy at that age than a good dog show. And maybe it was my hyper-religious upbringing, but this was one of the only secular shows that we were allowed to watch at our house. And so I ate up every rerun that I could. But I think the real reason that this show really sticks out to me is the way it coincides with a big event in my life. At the age of 7, I remember a man knocking on our back door, and I was the one that answered it. I didn't know who the man was. I remember telling my mother that someone was at the door, and upon seeing who was at the door, I was quickly told to go to the back room. And there was a discussion. I don't remember what they said, or I couldn't hear much, and the man was quickly gone. I was later told that that man was my father, and that would become the one time in my life that I actually met him, that I remember seeing his face. See, from what I've been told, my dad was a bit of a hobo himself. He was a traveling man. They said he would travel across the country, either riding trains or hitchhiking, meeting people along the way. I don't really know much about his life. He left when I was really young. And I guess being about the age of 7 and into this show, something must have clicked in my mind at that age, where I got this idea in my mind that if somehow this dog would meet my dad out on his adventures, maybe he'd bring him back home to us. This show has always really been ingrained in my head. It's just a really big part of my growing up. And I think the song, in a big way, has always stuck with me. There's something about a song. You can't keep watching the show necessarily, but you can take a song anywhere with you. You'll be working, you'll be doing things, and this is like the song that comes to your mind that you hum, and it's just the one song that's kind of always followed you. Well, this Littlest Hobo song is the one that's always followed me. So when I was starting out this new project, nothing seemed better for me to start this whole story than to share my favorite song. I'm so glad you took some time out of your day to hear my little story. If you have any memories or thoughts about the Littlest Hobo TV show, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you haven't ever watched the Littlest Hobo, I encourage you to YouTube it. There's all kinds of clips and episodes out there, and I think you'd be really entertained by it. I'd love to hear about your first reaction to this great Canadian classic. Until next time,